Hello and welcome. I'm Ashwin Ahmad, and I'm very pleased to be in conversation with former Foreign Secretary Ranjan Mathai. And today we are going to be talking about why British Prime Minister Boris Johnson will not be attending as chief guest for India's Republic Day. Ambassador Mathai, first off, a very warm welcome to you. Thank you for coming on our show. Now, first off, let me ask you this question. Wasn't this cancellation kind of imminent, as in we knew it to some extent, given the responsibilities he had at home? I mean, and the recent announcement of the national lockdown.
Well, good evening and good to be with you on your program, and thank you for having me. Well, yes, you could say that in terms of his responsibilities, um, the mutant virus and the way it is raging all seem to have sprung up a few weeks after he had formally accepted the invitation to come here. And so certainly, yes, it was something which was on the cards. Whether it was imminent, I can't say because, one isn't privy to any communications between the governments. But it is fully understandable in the terms in which you have put it, given the heavy weight of the responsibilities he has and how optically it would be for the Prime Minister, how important it is to be seen to be at home and doing his best to get things under control. Mind you, by the 26th, probably 5-6 million people in the UK, including everybody who is likely to be traveling for such purposes, would have been vaccinated. But I think there's a larger message of the importance of dealing with the crisis at hand, which I think this cancellation conveys.
Ambassador, you've talked about conveying a message, but I'd also like to point out to you, perhaps it could have been also seen, as you pointed out, in a bad light, given the fact there was a perception of this farmers and the human rights crisis, and the fact that the increasing mutant COVID cases from UK passengers coming to India has been increasing. So for him to perhaps come at this time, do you not think it would perhaps have been an embarrassment slightly for both India and the United Kingdom?
No, I don't think the fact that there's the mutant variant of the pandemic is raging in his country. We have not politicized this vaccine at this problem, this crisis over the pandemic at any point. This virus has not been looked at politically. So I don't think that is the issue at all. And as I said, 5 to 6 million people. I mean, it's an amazing achievement for that country. Their scientific people and their NHS and others have geared up. Their armed forces are involved. They would have had close to 10% of their population vaccinated by the time the Republic Day comes around. And I don't think it has much to do with the farmers' protests either. I don't see that as proximate cause for this. I think it is straightforward the political importance of being at home to tackle the crisis. And it is a genuine crisis in their country.
I just want to ask you here, let's shift away a little bit. We have seen, and you have seen when you were ambassador to the UK as well. But I want you to comment a little bit on, what seems to be a growing, I wouldn't say anti-India, but certainly voices against India in the Caucasus. I mean, we talked about, the question that was posed to the Prime Minister and, 35, 36 MPs raising the issue of the farmers' human rights. So is this anti-India caucus growing from your experience? Do you think India should expect, such caucuses to rise, especially from the Labour Party and, what Jeremy Corbyn had said in his tweet before the elections?
Well, the existence of these caucuses, as you call them, probably a right word given the element of them trying to work within the party system, does exist. I don't see it as a growing phenomenon. We have had far worse in previous times when things were very, very bad. Most of it is linked to diaspora politics and the way in which certain members of parliament and particularly those on the backbenches are forced to pander to their constituents. And among those constituents, it tends to be the most radical who tend to be the most vocal. So, yes, I mean, those people are there. They're an irritant, but I don't think they will affect the course of India-UK relations. No, I don't think. It hasn't happened in the past and it won't happen in the future. I think that they will continue to be there, and certainly to them, there will be added these voices about, how things are domestically in India and so on. But I think both governments are fairly mature. They understand what electoral politics is, what democratic politics is. We fully understand the kind of compulsion certain members of parliament have, and they understand our politics pretty well by now. The aim of the two governments will be to focus on what is our common interests and how to build on them in this
Well,
post-Brexit world.
I'm glad you brought up this post-Brexit world because that is what I was going to ask you. The Prime Minister, the British Prime Minister, has indicated that he's likely to come to India just before the G7 summit. He's invited India as a G7 plus three. So I want to overall, how do you see the India-UK relationship going forward this year? We already have very strong ties with the UK, no doubt. But certainly with Dominic Raab's visit, we could perhaps expect a lot more. What are your expectations?
No, I'm glad you made the point, because I think even while answering your previous question, I should have mentioned it. The very fact that the Prime Minister, while conveying his regrets at not being able to keep the commitment, it's a very important commitment when you accept to be the chief guest at the Republic Day, did say immediately in the same message virtually that he wants to come fairly soon, as soon as it becomes possible, and to bring on with him very, very high level, very serious elements of our agenda. The G7 is the inclusion of India in one of the most crucial um, groupings in the world today, and particularly as the recovery out of this pandemic is being discussed globally. I think the G7 will have a very important role to play. And I think it's a recognition of India, its importance, that the British have conveyed. I think he's also talked about the G20. That is another extremely important opportunity, and COP26, I think it is, which they
Yes.
are organizing in the UK. And there, I think he's emphasizing the commonality of interests of both our countries in tackling climate change. And the important part of it is being leaders in the move to tackle climate change, to move to renewable energies, to look at new technologies, new global partnerships, rather than be takers of rules as they are made along. So it's very, very crucial, I think, that he has conveyed this message, that India is going to be very high up in his list of priorities. And the fact that he can't come for Republic Day is a blip caused by this pandemic and nothing else.
Ambassador, I'd also like to ask you now. We hear a lot about an FTA. We already know that trade and investment between India and the United Kingdom is increasing. And someone had made the point that, it would be even more favorable for India because the UK has its own laws now regarding environmental protection, labor laws, etc., which are independent of the EU. So, in that way, perhaps an FTA might be easier. But what I want to understand, and what our viewers, I think, want to understand, what more would an FTA guarantee for our two nations? What would be the possible benefits given the fact that we already have such excellent trade ties?
Well, Dominic Raab certainly did talk about the FTA when he came, and you were right to
Yes.
point that out. It was a very important signal, his coming here in the midst of all their problems in December and talking about the FTA, among other things. I don't think the FTA will be an immediate outcome of any visit. It's on the agenda.
Yes.
The British have a number of partners with whom they're already in negotiations, and I think they'll have to get those out of the way. With India, I think they would like to see broadly what has been agreed between India and the EU already stay in place, and
Mhm.
what we were working towards with the EU, that with a little plus. Yes, I think there are. I don't think they would deviate from EU positions on environment and labor laws and so on. They have made certain commitments in their withdrawal agreement, the Brexit agreement. So I think we will be looking for opportunities of Britain being global in its approach on things like finance. Of course, it will be pushing items like Scotch whisky and so on. It may be more willing than other European nations are to listen to our concerns over, data equivalence and to be allowing our professionals, particularly in the services field, the right of business visits. So I think those are the areas where we would be looking for something EU plus, and they would, of course, be looking for it in areas of specific interest to them, food, drink, that kind of thing. But also, this is an opportunity to remember that both of us as countries have placed a very great deal of importance on knowledge-based industries. So it will be interesting to see how we deal with creative industries, knowledge-based industries, science-based industries, and give them a greater free rein, whether it's through the trading arrangement or it is through bilateral relationships, built agreements on transfer of technology, sharing of scientific innovation, and so on. I think innovation is an area where we'll definitely see something more than we have seen with the EU so far.
I'd also but like to point out here, just to be a bit of a devil's advocate, we have had great excitement before. We've seen it with Theresa May, etc. Do you feel there is something perhaps different this time? Do you feel that, out of the EU, as in Britain is out of the EU, that there will be more of an impetus on Boris Johnson to perhaps, be accommodative of our interests, trade-wise and otherwise?
Well, I think certainly they would be looking, it would be a huge benefit to them to have reasonably quickly after the first phase of their partners, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, the usual countries with whom they are already negotiating, to have a country as large and as important as India sign on an agreement. So, yes, there is a potential for them being accommodative, particularly since I think they see a very big role for themselves in the area of finance, because given India's huge financial needs and the great degree of understanding which our regulators have of each other, of each other's practices, each other's rules, many of the, take our competition laws and our bankruptcy laws. It's well known that the UK-India dialogue contributed to the framing of some of these laws. So there's an understanding which we have among each other. Now, whether the situation in his country will be ripe for him to make major concessions on areas of interest to us, that remains to be seen. But I think there would be an impetus to try and forge an agreement with a growing economy like India and a major player like India as soon as possible. And I think it's important also to mention here that it's a good thing that the Brexit finally, and that it happened on the basis of an agreement, so that at least in terms of many Indian investments in the UK, their interests in having a market in the EU are by and large protected. There will be a lot of negotiations, there will be new formalities and so on. But one of our concerns was this, and I think this has to some extent been taken care of. The second spin-off, of course, is political. We can discuss that another time. The very great importance, I think, of the fact that this takes place against a backdrop when Britain and France, their relationship has not been damaged. Because when it comes to our part of the world, anything outside trade, it is these two countries who are going to really pull the weight far more than the rest of the EU. So yes, I think there is an opportunity which we now have to work with Britain, specifically on trade, specifically on finance, but also on larger issues of the Indo-Pacific and other areas of common interest.
I'm glad you mentioned Indo-Pacific. We've spoken about this in the past. We had our Foreign Secretary Harsh Shringla go to London, and certainly not just UK, but many of the major European countries, Germany, France, etc. So, where do you see a commonality of interest between Britain and India in the Indian Ocean? What can we offer each other? And there's been talk about a UK-India defense logistics pact. So, how do you see that going forward?
Well, it's early days, but the UK's new orientation will include a much greater focus on its maritime role. And that is
Mhm.
why I think the talk of the Indian Ocean is important. We, of course, have big stakes, not only in the Indian Ocean, but in sea lanes globally, which
Mhm.
are of equal importance to Britain, as well as defense technology. So I think these are areas in which we are going to see a lot more. And I'm glad to mention once again that with the
Mhm.
French also in, one can see that the British French relationship will be, I think, as far as defense goes, that will be how Europe can play some kind of a role globally. So the fact that those two will remain closely aligned on defense is also very important to us. And they both have a stake in the Pacific, in the Indo-Pacific, and they are both Indian Ocean, physically present in the Indian Ocean with their own territories. And I think another element which will be of importance is broadly what is called the blue economy. And this is
Right.
an area where I think Britain does uh, want to play a bigger role, which is why the issue of the fisheries in the negotiations with the EU was not about fish alone. It was being able to play a bigger role in the oceans of the world where a lot of the future is going to be decided.
I'd also now like to come when finally, and our two prime ministers are eventually going to meet, most probably sooner rather than later. Now, we've talked about a gamut of issues, but what would be the most pressing thing do you feel that would be certainly on Boris Johnson's mind and Prime Minister Narendra Modi's mind when they finally do meet in person or if not virtually?
Well, to some extent, that will be decided by the calendar of these events, which are
Mhm.
already in front of us. We have talked about the G7, we have talked about the COP20, COP26. So I think these are immediate priorities, and we have a lot in common there. So that is what we'll work on. I think we'd want to also make sure that the kind of relationship we build, we are able to define it fairly quickly as a strong, stable relationship. Work on areas like finance, including green finance. Work on issues of importance to the rupee. Work on issues of defense. What kind of partnerships they would like to build with us, particularly in the industrial area. They know that we are serious about Atmanirbhar in the defense area. So they would be looking for opportunities in those kind of fields. Of course, building a trade relationship will also be part of that. I think also um, the kind of making sure that there's a chemistry between the leadership so that there's an ease of communication that continues. I think that would be very important also for both of them.
We've talked about Britain and India as two separate countries, as we should. But I also, we also should not forget that many Indian firms are headquartered in London, but have business in Europe. In fact, we use London for that because English-speaking country, and we find it easy from there to go to the rest of Europe. Now, how and what do you, in your view, should we look at in terms of assurances, in terms of other things from London and from Prime Minister Johnson itself himself? Because I don't see a large number of firms, relocating to Europe. So how can we use him and perhaps get even France and Germany on board to ensure that the needs of Indian businesses remain is safeguarded?
Well, as I said earlier, I think to some extent, uh, the fact that they have withdrawn on the basis of an agreement which preserves a lot of their access to the single market by and
Right.
large, with certain additions in formalities and rules and so on. But without tariffs. So, this is very important. To that extent, I think our firms have been protected by the negotiators and the negotiations as they have come. What, if anything, we have to seek now is from the Europeans rather than from the British themselves. The British have a very, very big stake in ensuring that their future with the EU doesn't get a rocky, doesn't start getting bumps on the road. So they would, I think, adhere very carefully to what they have signed on to and try and build on it. So I don't think that's too much of an area of problem. We might need some help with ensuring that when our professionals who are based in London, and huge numbers of them are, need to travel on business, there are no new rules and restrictions that come up, particularly for the IT industry, but for others also. I think broadly we've not, not too much to press for, but we need to be vigilant at all times to make sure that this relationship remains smooth, because after all, over the last 45 years, many of our business leaders have acted on the presumption that this was going to continue, and suddenly it's been stopped. So yes, we need to be vigilant, and it will be a lot of matter of detail. I don't think at this point, one can speculate on what it might be.
I'd like to ask now, what do you think Britain will be more? There's been a complaint that Britain hasn't been receptive enough to our concerns regarding, Khalistani separatists and Kashmiri separatists, and this has been a long-standing thing. It's not now. But do you believe now, with Brexit happening, Britain getting seemingly closer to us or wanting to get closer to us with trade ties and other things, do you think perhaps there will be a move by London to be more accommodative to our interests, or is that too presumptuous to say at this point?
No, I think I've largely answered this question already when talking about the
Hmm.
Khalistanis and the Kashmiri lobbyists and so on.
Hmm.
Let me pose it as a counter question. I mean, if
Right.
our relationship between us as governments uh, is strengthened and grows, and we work on trade and we work on finance and we work on all the things we need to do together, talk of the Indo-Pacific strategic dialogue. Uh, Incidentally, one thing again among the immediate priorities will be pharmaceuticals and getting the world to recover. And so the fact that AstraZeneca and the Serum Institute of India are seen globally as the main hope today in terms of mass vaccinations, I think itself is a very important signal. But to come back to your question, one can pose a question: what more would you be expecting from them? Would you be expecting that their parliament will have laws which says that a MP cannot raise a certain subject which his constituents want him to raise? I'm not sure that that's going to work. What we need to ensure is that there is no encouragement of these elements, that they are not allowed to create problems for our High Commission. They are not allowed to create disruption in the city and create propaganda against us all the time. Those kind of areas, yes, we'll work, and we'll work mostly quietly, because we
Hmm.
are able to achieve a fair amount. Sometimes we don't succeed, but most often we do. We need to be
No,
able
no.
to build on this relationship.
I wasn't talking about the MPs per se, but and I wasn't, but a lot of the Khalistani separatists, they are either Canadian or British citizens who join these groups like Sikhs for Justice, etc. And so I was just wondering in that terms, because we do have a prime minister who wants to do global business, and he seemingly wants to do global business with India, and not just business. He wants to improve ties with India on all fronts. So can we expect, or can we be cautiously optimistic that perhaps he could look at these citizens who are creating such problems for us in the through safeguard surrounding our embassies, etc. Can we expect a little bit more from him? And if so, what could that take?
It doesn't take a great deal. It can be done. I don't see it as weighing very heavily on them as something that they need to do very quickly. They have
Right.
their rules. They have games they like to play. So I mean that will carry on. The issue which we need to be most concerned about is making sure that there are certain boundaries, certain red lines, which we convey very strongly, and we'll have to do that if we don't see any change. And I'm confident that this government is fully capable and willing to do that if they don't see any change. But at the moment, the elements you're talking about have not affected our trading relationship. They have not affected our strategic dialogue. They have not affected finance. They are an irritant. They are a problem. They are propaganda. They are a nuisance. If they become anything more than that, we'll have to convey very strongly, and I'm sure we will. And
Finally,
that message will go home very quickly. That message will go home very quickly.
Finally, as an expert and an avid watcher of India-British relations, what would you be specially looking for from the two nations in this coming year? What would you specially want from the two prime ministers to discuss, and for any agenda to happen in this coming year?
Well, I think the immediate priority has to be medicine, pharmaceuticals, tackling the pandemic globally, bilaterally, and so on, and making sure that the fact that we two are very major players in this, that we collaborate closely and work together to help other countries and build global partnerships. The second area I think would be in the phase of the recovery, whether through the G7 or bilaterally, a role in finance, a much bigger role for the City of London to work on financial arrangements with India. And third, I think a little further down the road, uh, some better strategic dialogue on the kind of challenges we face in India, which is specifically China, which is partly Pakistan, but the problems of terrorism third. The challenge in the Indo-Pacific is one area where I would want to see, and I think we will see something beginning to happen. And finally, at the end of the day, there is much talk of the so-called Anglosphere. Now, I don't know how relevant this will remain, but right now it is fairly high in the agenda of a lot of people. And the most prominent sort of symbol of the Anglosphere is the Five Eyes intelligence arrangement. Now, what it is, nobody is going to discuss this in public, and I certainly will not go beyond this. But to say that, given the kind of challenges we both face, is there something we can do with this group of countries? I think this is another area where I would be interested to see whether we could develop something.
And on that note, Ambassador Mathai, thank you so much for your time and expertise. I'm Ashwin Ahmad. Thank you for watching.